Welcome to Lawyers Who Learn, where we explore how attorneys' engagement and lifelong learning fuels their growth. Join us to uncover these journeys and gain insights for your legal career.
Jonathan, thank you for joining Lawyers Who Learn. You are a regular with teaching at Lawline. You've also been on Seagal's podcast that was done previously called Lawyers Who Lead. So appreciate all the teaching and guidance you've shared with the community.
Sure. Happy to be here. Really appreciate the invite.
I generally do 45 minutes of research before a podcast, and I really enjoyed learning about your background. And I'm just going to, if I could, try for 20 seconds to tell you what I found out, because
this is going to be good. Let's hear it.
Okay, let's see. And I'm going to just do highlights here. But let's, from a career standpoint, you wanted to start in the telecom industry, but you ended up getting a job for the FDA because of timing and, hiring at that time. From there, you ended up getting into cannabis because there was a Colorado company who needed your help in that area. So you were hired by them to do that. You ended up eventually building a cannabis practice from scratch at the different firms you were at. There was a childhood friend who also, there's a personal connection who had seizures, and I guess they used marijuana. So there was not only a professional, but there was a personal sort of connection there. And right now you run the Cannabis Law Practice Group at Saul Ewing. So that's the big overview. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. But for me, really what's interesting also on the personal side, you're very involved in the Jewish community in Maryland. You're on the at least when I looked at this, you were on the board of the local, the Beth Phelan Dahan School Board. You're on the Hillel Governing Board. You actually were a founding member of the Beta Loda Foundation, which grants prospective scholarships, I think, to students. You've done a lot of pro bono. So basically, you're just a damn good guy. And you've also taught, like I said, taught 3 courses. There's 3 courses at least live on Lawline right now. One on food, beverage, and agriculture, agribusiness. One on landscape of hemp, and national bioengineered food and disclosure. And the reason I bring all this up about work and stuff like that, we're probably not going to cover most of it in this podcast. We might, but my hope is to talk about something, and maybe we won't go there because it depends on your answer now, that you generally don't get to talk about. And this is called Lawyers Who Learn. And as you know, your career path never goes that straight path that you want it to. There's zigzags in here that you've kind of had to learn and adapt throughout your career. So let me ask you, when you think about that and you think about those who are learning and can relate to that, is there something that you wish people would ask you more about your career, about where you are today, that you would love to talk about? And if not, we'll go more the traditional route as well, and we'll discover that. But I just love to sort of give you that opportunity first. Now I'm done talking.
Thanks so much. And I appreciate having that background. I should probably just record that and I can play that. And that way I don't have to talk about myself. It's a little less lawyer conceited. But one thing I really like talking about with law school students, particularly now with uncertain times, is paths that aren't linear. And so what I wish people would ask me about is, did you always plan to go into this area of the law? Did you always plan to be a cannabis attorney, a cannabis law attorney? I mean, as you previewed in my background, the answer is absolutely not. And it was really scary. I'm a very planned out person, or at least that's how I grew up. And in my household, it was, you go to as many, you go to undergrad, you go to graduate school, you work in a big office, a very stable environment. And I think not having a linear path, other than being scary and letting me deal with those emotions and navigate that, was really about learning what I wanted rather than what I thought was safe or what was the prescribed path for me. So I'm really big on, as much as I can, whenever I lecture at a law school, to not just talk about a law or a program, but really to talk about career path, linearity, those sorts of things. So that's what I really wish people would ask me more about.
That's a great area, and of course, when we were younger, cannabis wasn't even legal in the States. So that would
Yeah.
be crazy. If you were that hardcore when you were a kid, I would have been impressed.
The joke that I make is I never thought I was going to be doing anything legally or responsibly with cannabis as an adult. I certainly didn't envision that I would be representing clients as a lawyer and that my firm would be recognized in this area. So yeah, absolutely no expectation of that whatsoever.
And we might go back, to your early career and now just keep going back and forwards, but just a level set, just so I can understand, and those who are watching, where are we at? I know it's still not legal federally, and I know that almost, 30 states, maybe I'm making that number up. A lot of states have made it legal in some form, including New York. What are you getting is your practice growing significantly? And if so, just out of curiosity, I'm just curious, who are your clients who's coming to you now to try to build it? Where do you see this industry going?
Yeah, we're at a really.
I said I wasn't going to go this route, but I still am interested, so I want to know. So
yeah, it's really interesting, and it's something that people like to talk about, but I think are still a little afraid to talk about. It's still taboo. It's funny, we don't talk about alcohol as a recreational product, but we somehow refer to marijuana or cannabis as a recreational product. I like to say adult use because just like alcohol is an adult use product, why are we stigmatizing cannabis? There's a whole sordid history of why we do that, and that's another podcast. But it's an interesting time. We have the federal government currently proposing to move cannabis from Schedule 1, which is by definition really illegal for all purposes, to Schedule 3, which is legal for some purposes or authorized for some purposes. That's a proposal. It's not finalized. There's been a change in administration. There's a lot of hemming and hawing about, will the Trump administration follow through on the Biden administration's proposal?
I can tell you the answer is no.
There's a lot of misconceptions in this space, and I would say that one misconception is that Democrats are pro-cannabis and Republicans are anti-cannabis. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds, pun somewhat intended, on cannabis.
And I missed that one until you said it.
Cannabis politics, but if you look at why cannabis reform has not moved in the Senate, yes, it's true that a large block within the Republican caucus of the Senate has not been supportive, but it's actually been the Democrats who blocked some of the major reform measures from coming to the Senate floor. It's more complicated than that,
sure.
Like everything in this space. But be that as it may, I always like to tell people, you cannot assume Democrat pro, Republican anti, young person pro, old person anti, women or men. It doesn't fall across traditional demographic lines. And look at a state like Mississippi, solid red state. They've got a medical cannabis program. I met with the organizers of that ballot campaign when they were organizing, and I thought to myself, this is never going to pass. But people have personal connections. People have these medical connections, these family members who have benefited from cannabis, like you referenced in my story. So
just as an aside, this is more of a personal antidote of me and those I know. I've always been pro, legalization for all the reasons about, especially all the people get incarcerated for it and all those different areas. I can tell you though, it is really annoying walking around New York and Brooklyn and anywhere I go really. And I just can't, it's just everywhere. And it's just at a point where I'm just something feels off to me.
Right.
And there's the medical marijuana and then there's the legal use. And I'm actually, from a personal standpoint, I don't know. I think it's gone too far something is just not right.
Well, there's an interesting phenomenon in New York, which is that there are a large number of illegal dispensaries.
Yes, and I was reading about that recently.
You as a typical adult would not know which dispensaries are legal and illegal unless you ask them for a copy of their license, which you're not going to do. Only a regulatory lawyer like me would be interested in something like that. But New York has tried to crack down a bit, but
yeah, but it's more about the people, those who feel like they can just smoke anywhere now.
Sure.
Where before, I guess it was sort of like that. It just, there's a sense of you just feel something's off. And I know what you're talking about. When my kids were in elementary school, something popped up two doors away. It's wow, that's crazy. And I walked in and they're like, well, we are considered when you buy it, it's considered a donation. It's not I don't know, something just like that
Big shot.
doesn't sound
Yeah,
right.
right.
All right. So no, I appreciate that. But here's what's interesting. You have, I think we're around the same age, mid 40s.
Yep.
Yep. So you have checked all the boxes of law school to a really successful legal career at an AmLaw 100 firm and leading and building a group in a cool area. How do you feel about that? Is that the story you feel when you think about how you've grown?
So I've always been the kind of person that I end up getting good results, but I feel like I get to those good results in a scrappier, non-traditional way. So um, I got waitlisted at my first choice college, and I worked my entire senior year while my friends were partying. I didn't get into the first law school I wanted to, so I went to one law school and then I transferred, which, by the way, if there's any law school students, I do not recommend transferring. It's not the easiest way to go through law school, but I understand why people do it, and I did it. I really wanted to work at a mega firm and be fancy and, rub elbows with people who are super smart. And the firm that I ended up getting a job with after FDA never would have hired me out of law school. I was not the top of my class. So I'm more of a nonlinear getting to the destination, if you will, person. And so, yes, I have worked at, an AmLaw 100 firm. And yes, I started my legal career at an agency. But to your point, I went to that agency because my first kind of career path didn't work out because the job market wasn't great and I had to pivot. And what's interesting is I think I'm much more with no disrespect to my friends in the telecom bar who I'm still friends with. I'm much more satisfied with the work that I'm doing now by having that nonlinear path and falling into this weird, wonderful area of the law that we know as cannabis law. So I feel grateful now, but as I said earlier, I'm a very planned person and somewhat cautious and nervous by nature. And so it's been tough. I've had to do a lot of, I don't love the phrase soul searching, but thinking, as I'm traveling to speak at conferences or, going to meet new prospective clients, how did I get here? What have I learned? Where have been the pain points, and how those made me better?
You know, and that's why I asked you that, because we just met. You can get somebody's impression of them in the first 15 seconds, and you give off a very authentic, genuine vibe, right? And I'm not just kissing up because you're a longtime faculty member, but you do. And I knew this, you would answer in that regard. And so I think it's an important, because we're talking about learning, right? And growth as an attorney. And it's something that's not talked about as much as we want to, even though we do have a lot of courses on stress and anxiety. And there's a lot of mandatory courses on that now, depending on the state. What do you mean by soul searching? If you don't, and by the way, any question I ask you, you're like, I don't know, I can't answer that. But like, what do you? I'm a little curious what that means.
I do a lot of thinking about myself, about how I show up for myself, my colleagues, my family, my community. And truth be told, if I'm putting my cards on the table, I would love to quiet my brain sometimes, but I also think that the busyness of my brain and how much I process makes me really empathetic and makes me a good listener and a good husband and a good father and a good partner to my colleagues and a good, guest lecturer, or whatever the case is. I will say it's something that I struggle with, but I really think about things from a lot of different angles. Sometimes I wish I didn't. I wish I could come to a quicker decision, but some people talk about thinking and consensus by committee. I have a lot of people who I rely on, colleagues, family, community members, and I'm trying to get better about being okay asking people what they think of what I did or what my idea was, not in a seeking approval sort of way, but just
Yeah.
having those check-ins. But as far as talking to myself, um, it's trying to not be hard on myself if something doesn't work out how I wanted, or trying not to beat myself up about the fact that I didn't get a summer associate position at the firm that I had worked at before I went to law school, where I thought I was a shoo-in, like those sorts of things. I try to embrace the, um, think good and it will be good, or think positively and good outcomes will arrive. It's hard, when you're in a bad situation or you think a bad situation, it's difficult to see the positives. But when I talk about soul searching or really kind of doing deep thinking about myself, it's, wow, that was really tough, but what did I get out of it? And was it so bad?
Yeah.
And could I have maybe freaked out a little bit less or a lot less about it beforehand? I always try to tell my kids, don't freak out about something until it's really bad. And if then it's
Yeah.
really bad, we'll figure it out. I should be
I,
giving myself that advice.
you and everybody else, right? It's just, you're not alone. And every single person I've ever talked to, always has that same sort of, anyone who's especially if you're a high achiever and you're trying to figure out, okay, what does next look like? And even if you're not, it's a natural thing in your mid 40s. I hate the word midlife crisis. I like to call it a midlife rut, where you're just like, okay, what is the next 20 years look like? The story that I had in my head, I don't know if I'm there. And so
Right.
what do I do about that?
Or it's like a midlife check-in or evaluation or opportunity check, right? Where
Not
it's,
even rut, right? It's just midlife.
yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, the other thing, you asked, if someone could ask me, or what would I wish people ask me more? Something else that I think of a lot is this notion of, you look at people that you admire or that are in positions that you want to be in, and you think they've got it all figured out, or they seem so calm and cool and collected. What I wish people would ask me is, are you really as put together as you appear? Because I grew up, a lot of music, a lot of acting, a lot of theater, those sorts of things. Truth be told, my last couple weeks of undergrad, I was thinking about, am I moving to New York and trying to be an actor, or am I going to law school? Very divergent things, but really being a lawyer is somewhat being an actor. And, I think that one of the things I think about in the legal profession in particular is, there's younger attorneys and older attorneys working together. And I think sometimes younger attorneys, I definitely did this when I was a junior associate, I would look at these partners and I would think, oh my gosh, they have it so figured out. They're so polished. They're, dressed so well. And, they've got it all, right? Their life is so balanced. And I think that is often not the case at all. And I wish people would talk about that more, not only because it reveals truth, but also because it makes everybody feel like, okay, I need to not burn the candle at both ends as much to achieve what someone else has, which is in reality not really something that they have.
Right. And there's that, and like, there's thinking they have it together. And then of course there's the comparing to, oh, I wish I had what they had, or I was as famous or successful, or, put that in there. Let's change gears for a second. Can you just tell me what like a typical day like is for you? Let's stop at that question. Yeah.
Sure. So I have multiple days within a day, meaning I'm the managing partner of my office. So dealing with personnel, both attorney and non-attorney. I have a practice, right? So I'm talking to my clients, doing client work, doing business development work. I talk at conferences, right? So I'm sometimes traveling to conferences or doing webinars or doing podcasts. And then more nights of the week than not, at least during like the weekdays, I have some sort of an extracurricular commitment, whether that's a board meeting, whether that's coaching my daughter's basketball team, whether that's going to my son's tennis match, something. I I try to have check-ins with my parents as much as I can over the phone. And there's this joke, are you going home or are you going to a board meeting? And it's usually I'm going to some sort of a board meeting. You referenced a bit in my intro about I'm on the board of trustees of my kid's school. And at the moment, our our longtime director of education, I mean, I'm talking 4+ decades, is having her do and retiring, which she deserves. But I'm on the head the school search committee, right? And so the head of school search committee. So I've got my board meetings for my Beth Tefillah crew. I've got my Towson Hillel board meetings, my Food and Drug Law Institute board meetings. So a long-winded way of answering your question, my day is, there's not a typical day, although I will just tell you like a week breakdown. Monday to Thursday, when I'm not traveling, I'm in the office. I think it's really important that my, the team that I'm on, which is my office, sees that I'm here and accessible if they have anything. I don't ever like people to feel like they can't. Sometimes when you have to text someone or call them, you don't feel like you want to bring up an issue. So I like to be here and show them that I'm here and here for them. Monday through Thursday in the office if I'm not traveling, although I do travel a decent amount for work. The nights, like I said, board meetings, basketball practices, that sort of stuff.
Let me ask you this. What gives you professionally the most energy? Because you mentioned many different things professionally you do.
So
not inside of work, not inside of law. Yeah, I'm going to ask you outside, but just inside. Because outside, I know you're going to say coaching your kid's team, right? Like or something like that. So
I will say that, but there is like a little bit of a difference on the outside, which I'll get back to. But as hard as it is, I like when I struggle through something with somebody or have a difficult conversation and then we get to a good spot, because I'll admit I am non-confrontational. I like to be loved by everybody, which is a really difficult trait to have in the roles that I have. But I'm really realizing that if I try to keep everything copacetic, that we're just avoiding issues, we're not solving problems, we're not getting to a better spot. And sometimes those really horrible conversations that I build up in my head end up being, uncomfortable, but like we get closer, we get better, working relationships because of it. So I think what gives me a lot of energy is kind of two things. Number one, what I just said, working through something difficult with somebody and having them realize that you care enough to have that conversation, and getting to a result where maybe things were escalating, but now they're de-escalating. And that might sound weird as something that gives me energy, but it makes me feel maybe relieved and I get energy from that. The other thing is I really love observing, particularly my colleagues. I'm on the regulatory side. I love watching my litigator colleagues who have skill sets that I don't have do their thing. And it just makes me really proud to be at the same firm with them. And I'm like, wow, they can't do what I do, but I can't do what they do, but we work really well together. And that learning really invigorates me and makes me happy and proud of where I've come.
For the first part, have you ever done any like formal or informal training? Like there's the book called Radical Candor. There's a book called Crucial Conversations. There's a course in that, like what, because obviously lawyers who learn, I want to figure out like, what have you learned, or are you just learning on the job? Like, is it just innate? Like it's who you are and you just kind of learn as you talk.
It's funny. On my way to my desk this morning, I ran into our firm-wide managing partner who happens to live in Baltimore. So good friend of mine. I think everybody at the firm feels like he's a good friend of theirs, which is an odd thing to say about your firm-wide managing partner. Not the case everywhere.
What's his name?
Jason St. John.
Okay.
So I said to him, I blurted out the line this morning. I said, I think I need a coach. And we were talking about this coach conversation. And I was thinking about this because of a board I sit on and a conversation around coaching and mentoring. And I said, I don't know if it's a coach or a therapist, maybe a little bit of both. But I think as leaders, particularly in the legal field, you're dealing with a lot, and you think about yourself and look in the mirror a lot and think, is it me? Is it somebody else? Can we both be doing something different? And so the answer is I've not done any formal leadership coaching. I've been through leadership development programs.
That's what I'm so did the firm put that on for you?
I've done some firm leadership training, like we've done leadership retreats. I've done, you mentioned my deep involvement in the Jewish community, the Baltimore Jewish community. I did a 2-year leadership program. It's for leadership of what we call the Associated, which is Jewish Federation of Baltimore. But it was leadership within the Jewish community context, but absolutely applicable to other leadership. And then it's a lot of observing, checking in with office managing partners of our other offices. And we have a number of them throughout the country, checking in with my firm-wide managing partner, checking in with our mentoring folks and our training team. So,
So
yeah,
when you went up to Jason and said, I think I need a coach, what did he say?
he loved the idea. We talked about it. We explored, our dual thoughts on it, some of the benefits. I
And what
think,
was the specific thing you wanted a coach for? If you don't mind sharing.
yeah, sure. I think navigating those difficult situations,
The conversations.
not implementing, executing, implementing, and communicating, and really navigating situations in a way that is, I was about to use the word courageous, not courageous, but it's honest, but it's compassionate.
Got it. So you want somebody who knows what they're doing, that you can talk things out with and help you by you. That's why you said coach/therapist, by you talking and figuring out, by the way, a good way to know if it's a coach or a therapist. This is what one of my former coaches said to me. A therapist looks backwards and a coach looks forward. It's not always that equal, but it's just an easy
Sure.
way to kind of figure that out.
Sure.
And coaches charge a lot more because therapists, depends if therapist is covered.
I thought it would be therapist charging more.
No, well, because insurance sometimes covers that. But
Sure.
And how are you going to go about finding a coach?
Yeah, to be honest, it's not something I'm completely committed to. It's just something I've been thinking about because I've observed other leaders who I admire, and they are very open about talking about their coaches, their mentors, and it makes me think, why not me, right? And so I think I'm very into exploring ideas, avenues, ways to better myself. I definitely don't think I have all the right answers.
Yeah.
So it's more of I'm at the idea stage than at the execution stage. But if I decide to move forward with it, I think it's reinstilling some confidence in myself and knowing that there was reason I was chosen for various leadership positions, and to not lose my sense of thinking about things deeply, but also not being afraid to march forward.
It's funny because in my head, and I've never formally coached anybody, but I've been coached a lot, and I've done a lot of mentorship like you have for entrepreneurs and other areas like that. I almost in my head have this story, like this podcast. If you feel like at the end of it, it was a therapy session or a coaching session, I won. Because like generally that's what energizes me, to not just follow the script of like, well, tell me what you did, how you got from there to there. Like, it's like, what makes you tick as a person? And so if I could quote unquote coach, I would be like, you're like, they're perfect is the enemy of good there. Like, find the wrong coach and then like figure that out from obviously there's money and time involved, but like you would clearly, you think 4 levels deep. So having somebody to help you kind of unlayer that, I think you get a lot of energy from, if you have the time.
The other thing is I like talking about, I don't love this phrase, but the softer side of a profession, right? The coaching, the mentoring, the mental health challenges, right? Because we all have them. Very few people talk about them. And mental health challenges can be a very wide, there can be diagnosed, there can be things that creep up, and tamp down. I'm more talking about the mental side of a profession than the physical side of the profession, because
What's the physical side?
The physical side is the doing of the work. I don't mean like the labor, but the more the thinking about yourself and your role and your interaction, rather than the thinking about how to answer a legal question.
Totally. One of the first, I worked with different coaches, but like one of the best lines that I learned was there's only two things that you can control in life. You can't control the stock market. You can't control the weather. You can't control your spouse. You can't control your boss. You can't control your employees. You only control how you think and how you feel. And that's what a coach does, helps you go through that process. And just last question, you said you manage your team. How big is like your team? How many people are you managing?
Sure. So our office is 70 plus in terms of staff and lawyer breakdown. There's, I think 40, 38, 39 lawyers. And so the rest are staff. So that's practice assistants, that's office services, that's facilities. So it's a little bit of everything, but
you're responsible for that many people in your team.
The best way to refer to my role is that I'm the CEO of the office.
Got it.
I am very big about delegating and trying. I don't know if my team would say what they would say, but I really try to delegate and trust, not micromanage. No one has the time for that, and really nobody wants that. But I'm pretty hands-on.
So let me ask you this, because you're coming across of such like a easygoing, not a high-powered attorney, right? Like a guy who like I would want to hang out with. But most attorneys, like you're not like we sort of joked about in the beginning. You're not wearing the suit. Can you just share that quick story?
I'm really glad you mentioned this because I'm wearing a hooded blazer, and I was telling you before we started recording, the very first cannabis conference I spoke at, I was wearing a suit and tie, and someone came up to me and said, "Are you with the IRS?" And no knock against the IRS. I did a summer clerkship at the IRS that was great, but not for me. And so I'm wearing a hooded blazer, and I wear jeans and sneakers every day. I'm a sneakerhead. It's what I love. And so I like to tell our team, show up in wearing what you want reasonably. Let's be cognizant of clients in the office, but I'd rather you come wearing jeans and sneakers and a sweater than not come at all. So your point about me being easygoing, I will push back to say someone gave me an analogy when I was in law school that I love. Just kind of love. I'm like a duck. I'm paddling furiously underneath the water, but on the surface, I appear, hopefully, calm, cool, and collected. But I'm glad you raised this because it gives me the opportunity to dig a little bit deeper on something I was talking about earlier. I wish people talked a little bit more about this notion of appearing so calm, cool, and collected, and how everything is so kind of copacetic and smooth. I think that's great if it instills confidence in other people. It's not great if it instills a notion of, well, I need to appear calm, cool, and collected too. It's okay to not be calm, cool, and collected sometimes.
No, and totally. But I would also say you're pretty open and transparent and vulnerable. And so here's my question. If let's say that all those people who you're the CEO of in your office watch this podcast, would they be surprised? Would they be like, nope, that's the person that we know, and that's so awesome? Like, which side would they be on?
I think there would be some positive head shaking on things like being empathetic and trying to be the nice guy when possible. I think other people would tell you that, when I'm passionate about something, I will argue for it pretty aggressively if I think it's the right thing to do, even if people don't like it. But also, hopefully, they would agree that no matter where we go, I try my best to be transparent. One of my big things that I've really been trying to do in this role is if I'm going to make a decision that I know people aren't going to agree with, I try to explain the why. Not that it's going to make people happy, but when decisions are made and people don't understand why they're being made and there's no feedback given or conversations had, people assume the worst. They assume you don't care. They assume that you think your way is better than their way. Sometimes someone else's way might be better, but it's not feasible to implement on a wide scale or something like that. So I would hope that people would see this and say, okay, I get that. That's generally correct. And I would also hope that they would say, you know what? Some of those things I didn't know. I didn't know that he really thinks hard and takes these things to heart and, maybe beats himself up over the hard decisions, but then gets to a better spot. So,
you know what else they're going to say? Oh, wow. I'm just like, I'm glad I'm not alone because I feel the same way because everybody feels that way. literally everybody
Yeah.
that I've ever talked to beats themselves up about something.
Yeah. And look, I would hope that for some people that that's not true, right? That they're super confident and that they don't let the petty stuff kind of get to them. And but it's this is a high stress profession. It can be. What I've learned is, and I've been at a few different firms, I found my Goldilocks situation and I've surrounded myself with people who maybe aren't exactly like me, but they let me show up as I am, and they don't at least outwardly judge me for my busy brain and my deep feelings. And they embrace that and they encourage me and say, that's what makes you who you are, a good leader, a good, client service representative, whatever it is, the role that I'm playing at that moment. So,
I could tell you if I was a client of yours, I would truly appreciate that because I want to work. I want somebody who is um, very substantively good at what they do, but I want someone who's a human when I can enjoy and talk to and relate to. The only challenge is if I was your client, it's hard to do that when I'm paying you an hourly rate, which is another conversation for another day.
yeah,
Can you educate me just for 30 seconds? How does it work in big law? So, because you mentioned you're the CEO of your office and you're head of the practice group, is each practice group at a firm literally considered like a company within a company, and you don't really interact as much? Like when you talk to other practice groups, it's like almost a different company. Just can you share that a little bit with me and how and others
sure.
who are interested in going into big law?
So I'll talk about our model. I think every firm is a bit different, but we have different groups. We have industry groups, and cannabis is an industry group, and I'll talk about what that means. And then we have practice groups, right? So labor and employment would be a practice group. You're able to talk about workflow, you're able to talk about similar client issues. Cannabis, we, and this is a legal industry thing, we're not unique in this, but several years ago, maybe many, many years ago, law firms recognized that their clients like to be made to feel, does that phrase even make sense? Like to feel like their legal counsel is organized in ways that show up for their industries, right? So what do I mean by that? So the cannabis group here, which is an industry group that I co-founded and co-chair with a very good friend of mine who's a partner in our Chicago office, we have representatives from a lot of different groups: securities, labor and employment, litigation, IP, and tax. And so cannabis is not one thing. I'll never forget this. I met someone at a conference years ago and I said, what do you do? He said, I'm a cannabis lawyer. I said, well, what in the cannabis space do you do? For example, I'm a regulatory lawyer. He said, well, I do everything. I said, you do tax? Yeah. You do labor and employment? Yeah. I thought to myself, I'm going to see this guy's name in the back of a bar journal with an ethics complaint next to his name. You can't be everything to everybody. There's enough to tackle in the regulatory space alone. But back to your question, we work really hard at Saul to not be siloed. We are very integrated. We track imported and exported business from office to office. We're broken down by two departments: litigation and transactional. Transactional hosts a lot of things like, kind of regulatory folks like me. So it's not just deals, but we're always talking about how do we work together and the teams and the team approach. Look, the dream for a lawyer who has their own book of business is to have clients and matters across as many industries as possible, to the extent you have the people to service those matters, and who you trust and they trust you. If you're siloed and all you're doing is work within your area, first of all, it's really boring. You're not going to learn a lot. It's also dangerous.
Yeah.
One of the things we talk about as a firm, from a an ethical obligation, is siloed lawyers tend to be dangerous lawyers because you're not checking in with anybody else and you're dabbling and maybe trying to do too much. So to answer your question, long story short, we are very integrated, office to office, industry group to practice group, and practice group to industry group, department to department. In any which way you can slice it and dice it, we're very integrated. And for someone like me, who really built my practice at this firm, it's a really nice thing to have, because anytime I'm out with a friend or a contact, they say, I'm in this industry and I have this company and this need. there's really not anything we can't do with the exception of a couple small areas of the law. And so it makes it interesting. You always want to learn about what people are doing. You never know who you're going to be able to work with and help.
That's really helpful. Thank you. We'll go to maybe one or two more topics, if that's okay.
Sure.
Perfect. You have 3 active courses with Lawline right now. We mentioned in the beginning, I think you said you're about to teach another one soon.
I'm doing an update to my cannabis program.
Okay. Can you explain the origins behind, do you teach, how often you teach, how you created the course, what's your motivation for teaching, what is the value and benefits you get from teaching? Give us the soup to nuts for anyone else who is thinking about like teaching a CLE course somewhere, but is not sure if it makes sense or what the benefits are for them.
Sure. I have to remember back to my first Lawline course. This was pre-COVID, might have been 2017, 2018. I recorded in the studio on Broadway. It's all remote now. I somewhat miss the days of coming up to record.
Of course.
Your team is so great. They're always so nice and great to see. But I don't exactly recall the on-ramp. It might have been a colleague of mine who had recorded courses for Lawline and encouraged me to do it. And our marketing department said, "You're trying to grow a practice. This is a really good way to do it."
Was that the first time you taught a CLE with us?
I think so. I think it was like 2017, maybe 2018. Now, I speak at a lot of conferences, but I remember because I did a food and bev course.
Yep.
Then I did a cannabis course, and they're hour-long CLEs, and I was coming up with a slide deck. And if you don't have any materials out there, coming up with a 60-page slide deck is a decent amount of work. Now, looking back, and I've adapted that slide deck every which way over the years. And a year or two ago, I threw it out and created a new one because it just was easier and my audiences deserved it. But you learn, that's good, like weekend morning, snowy day kind of work because you're not distracted. You can really think. The emails aren't going crazy. Your texts aren't going crazy. But I will admit, I sometimes dread that drafting process. But when people ask me questions and I know answers and know the law and the regulations and which states have adult use and which states have medical and which states are allowing intoxicating cannabinoids and which aren't, I know that by memory because I've spent so much time with the material, and it's really the way to learn it. And also, if you're going to teach other people these things and you don't know it yourself, other than to draft it on a slide deck, I don't know, I have imposter syndrome, so I have to really be comfortable with the material. But it's so easy now with remote. You don't have to travel. It's coming up with the material. These don't need to be meaty slides. It's just something that you can talk about and impart wisdom to. I think some of the funniest things or most enjoyable things about Lawline for me is I've gotten emails from people I went to undergrad with or law school with. And they said, "Hey, I just had to complete my mandatory CLE requirements and I randomly found your cannabis course." And like, these are people who were definitely smarter than me in whatever schooling I was in with them. And the fact that they're watching this is a little funny. I think my law school professors would also find it funny. I was not the top of my class. I say the same thing when I guest lecture, that they would be horrified to know I'm imparting any sort of wisdom on anybody, but it's fun. And it gives me a lot of pride that I know something well enough to share knowledge with other people.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that. And that people reached out to you. I would hear stories, people like somebody was in a different country in a courthouse or somewhere else in a different state. And like somebody walked up to him like, "Oh my God, I've seen 6 of your courses on law." Like they were like a mini star to them. So that's super cool. What about, the reason I started this podcast was I'm a lifelong learner, very passionate about that and very passionate about what we do. The thing is, as you know, probably 98% of what you learn is not in a CLE course. It's outside the CLE course. But let's just for a moment focus on that 2% or whatever you want to call it, where you learn. Is there any CLE courses that you've taken in recently or in your career that actually truly resonated with you, more than just checking a box?
Yeah, great Great question. To think about that. Not exactly an answer to your question, but for a long time, I'm a member of a few different state bars. I was a glutton for punishment. I took multiple state bar exams, and I now am in a place where I don't have any mandatory CLE. But when I did, I would try to find areas of the law that I wanted to know better, but I didn't. And whether it's privacy or whether it's issues in contract drafting or AI, it's kind of like I was very passionate about music growing up. I didn't think I was going to be a professional musician. And I took as many music classes as I could in undergrad because I kind of knew that I wasn't going to be doing that. So I wanted to seek out the things that I really was interested in, right? So, CLEs on music law or how to put on a concert or, organize a festival, those sorts of things. So I don't know that I would say that any of them were deeply impactful, but while going through the process of having to complete CLE requirements, I always try to find something that tapped into something that was an area of interest for me, but maybe isn't something I get to focus on a day-to-day basis.
Got it. And we have some faculty members and that do courses on like engaging in topics in an engaging way, like the ethics behind Suits, like the show Suits, and they go through a different, and they have and there's clips during it, and they go through that, or the Succession, they go through the program and talk about different parts with different clips, and and those are things that become some of our most popular courses, as you can imagine.
Right.
So appreciate that. I really feel like that I've gotten to know the full you in different ways, from a personal level, professional level, to where you are. And so I guess I would end on, what is the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years look like in your mind, professionally and personally? I'm sure that's some of the questions that you have. And I know it's a loaded question when you're at a firm and you're probably happy there. But it's not just about where you're going to work. It's what does your life look like when you wake up 10. Let's ask that. In 10 years from now, you're waking up in the morning. Tell me what your life looks like.
Okay, so I'm 42 now. I'm 52. I'm really bad at math. I actually had to think about that one. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into the particulars of where my kids will be at the time. My son will be in college at the time. Is that correct? Yeah, because he's 12 now. No, he'll be just finishing up college.
Wow.
So the answer is I have no idea. The subtext there is I'm glad you asked me the question because it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. I mentioned, I really always wanted to work at a big firm, and I didn't know I wanted to be a leader of a firm. I didn't know I wanted to have my own practice. I think something that I've learned is that I really enjoy a few things about the legal profession. One is business development. I really like getting to know people's needs and helping them solve their problems, even if that's with someone who's not me. So I want to explore that more, increasing my business development reps. I also want to explore how I become a better leader, a leader in maybe a different capacity. So, maybe that's not just leading my office, but maybe one day being on my firm's executive committee. Maybe that's being an adjunct professor at a law school. I guest lecture now, and I've been admittedly hesitant to put another extracurricular activity on my roster. We have a joke in my house. If someone asks me to join a board, I tell them they have to call my wife because she's the gatekeeper. But yeah, I think what I would want my life to look like in 10 years, at least from a professional perspective, is satisfaction that everything that I'm doing is something that I want to be doing. I feel like I've increased my kind of capabilities at doing, whether that's leadership, whether that's business development, whether that's becoming more entrenched in the cannabis space, or broadening back to kind of my FDA law roots. But I think more comfort and certainty in whatever it is I'm doing, rather than trying to figure out, is what I'm doing the best, the right,
Yeah.
the most streamlined. It's more just, hey, what I'm doing is good, and there's a purpose for what I'm doing, and just, I think, feeling a little bit more settled on a regular basis than always have my head on a swivel and trying to figure out.
Yeah, totally. I could say one of my favorite lines, by the way, is we overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years or 1 year, and we underestimate what we can accomplish in 10 years. And, because now that I'm 47, now that I've been doing this for a while, you realize, oh, wow, decades go by. But like when you look to see where you were to where you are. And so, one of the things that I think about when I think about 10 years from now for me, while it's similar to you, I don't know that necessarily the particulars, but I would like to be able to paint that picture. And I'm working on that myself as well. Like as much as like, where am I living? Where am I waking up? What kind of shape am I in? Where am I moving to? Am I in an office? Am I traveling a lot? Go as specific as I will. That's what I'm working on. But the two things that I've figured out for my happiness, and just to share with you and anyone else who can do that, is it's a formula of, one, I'm able to control my time, in part or in whole, in choosing what I do and how I do it. And second, I have different parts in my life that I'm passionate about, and I put my all into it. And I'm left just completely exhausted from the impact that I'm trying to do from my passion. It doesn't have to be 100% of what I do, but it has to exist in different parts of my life. And if I'm able to control my time and be impactful and put in my all and feel like I am living with no regrets in those certain areas, I know I will feel like I'm doing the best that I can, because I can't do 100% of what I want to do because time is limited. So,
And I think, the notion of controlling your time, I was trying to land on that, and you did it in a much neater and more succinct way. But I think I've grown up in this, whatever opportunities come your way, you seize them and you figure out a way to make them work, and you say yes to everything and just figure it out later. And what I'm realizing is, I was having a conversation with a former colleague years ago, and he said, you're going to wake up one day and you're going to be on 10 boards. And I said, that's never going to happen. And a year ago, I had to start pulling back. And it was a little uncomfortable, but I was able to sleep and see my kids and do the things that I wanted to be doing, and some of the other things I wanted to be doing. And so controlling the time is big. I mean, I addressed your question from a work perspective. I would say from a personal perspective, and I know your family is big on travel, and we are as well. One of the things that I really like, I have two kids. I like individual travel with my kids, individual experiences, and some of the best memories, and my kids talk about it all the time. And it's amazing. It's something that I look forward to. I love traveling with my wife. We travel with our friends for, birthdays and anniversaries and those sorts of things. And those are amazing. And in 10 years, I want to have gone down a list of amazing destinations with the kids individually, but also as a family. We've got some, big travel plans to make plans on the horizon, as a family.
Give me your most exciting one.
Yeah. So, my wife and I are very involved in the Jewish community. We're very passionate about Israel. We've both been to Israel. Our kids haven't been. It's a long flight. We want to make sure, especially my 8-year-old daughter can hack that, an overnight flight and hitting the ground running. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to go to Europe with my kids, or go to Asia, or whatever it is. For now, the next trip up, my son and I and a good friend of mine from law school are going to Toronto. My son is a hockey fanatic. He's obsessed with Canada. He wants to, as he says, study abroad in Canada. And my daughter and I, with the same law school friend and his daughter, are going to Nashville because we're country music nuts. And I took her to Nashville when she was 5, which some might consider abuse, but she loved it, knew every song, was the mascot for every band and every honky tonk. So those are our next trips coming up.
Well, I can tell you, we took so we have 3 kids now. So I have 16-year-old boy-girl twins. And a 11-year-old boy. And I can tell you, the one-on-one trips, to your point, are the best, because when you're with them and you're alone, they talk to you and you can communicate and you get to know each other. And I'm grateful to have been done that more and more as I get older. But we went to Israel with them in March of 2023. And my wife's dad is Israeli, and he went with us, and he has 10 siblings, and his brother was there, and he actually does tours, and he has a jumper van, and we drove all around, and they were in the 67 and the 73 war.
Wow.
And they were telling us stories about when they didn't hear from his brother for a week, and everyone just assumed he was dead because there was no texting, there was no calling or whatever. And then he walked in a week later, they were mourning him, and he walked in, but it was such a memorable trip for our children. Obviously we're in a different world than we were then on so many levels. And that's, again, probably another podcast. But it's really traumatic where we're at in many ways. But also inspiring to see how it's energized different, the Jewish community that many have taken for granted, the freedoms we've had in America.
Yeah, I'm really totally agreed. And the trying to focus on the positives, the moments I've had with our community, the banding together, the fundraising, the shipping of, filling up of cargo planes, multiple cargo planes, who's going to Israel, who can take these supplies and those sorts of things. And so horrible that we're having to undertake these efforts, but also amazing to see what people will do, for their fellow community members.
I'm talking both, yes, supporting people in Israel and Israel as a whole, and we do a lot of that. I'm also talking about how in America, how many Jews have felt, many liberal Jews have felt abandoned, and it's been a confusing, challenging time. And when it's the first time when you always used to talk to your parents, and they would say, you don't realize how lucky we are, how special it is. And you're like, what are you talking about? Whatever. And then you're like, oh, we get it now.
Yeah.
And so anyways, I talk to my heart. So that's how it is.
Yeah, you're speaking these are, I'm very deeply involved in a lot of these conversations on a daily basis. So we're speaking the same language.
And I think it's always better to talk and have a conversation than not to.
Sure.
I've taken up enough of your time on your busy schedule, and I really appreciate that. And I know anybody who has the opportunity to listen to this will truly appreciate everything you've shared today. And maybe someday, when they're old enough or they care, you'll have your kids watch this or listen to it, because they'll really get value out of that. So
thank you. I appreciate the invite. It was a great conversation, and I'm just super grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch, and would love to meet you in person sooner than later.
Same.
We'll figure it out.
Let's get back to in-person recording and on Broadway, and then we can do that.
We it's funny, we burn the bridges there because we're now we have employees in 12 different states.
Sure.
I will tell you though, that office is still vacant because vacancy rate in New York City is still 80%. Or I don't know what it is, but I went to visit it a year ago, and it's exactly how we left it. So it's certainly waiting for us if we ever wanted to go back.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'll speak to you soon.